This is Charlie Crockett, Texas musician and descendant of Davy Crockett, inviting you to visit the Alamo. It's not the same Alamo you, remember. There's lots of new things to experience, like the 500 artifacts inside the Alamo exhibit at the Ralston Family Collection Center, the new Mission Gate and Lunette outdoor exhibit, and Surrounded, the Alamo Augmented Experience. It's all part of an ongoing restoration and expansion that will write the Alamo's next chapter. So don't wait. Plan your visit today at thealamo.org.
Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo Podcast. October 1835, the Texas Revolution is in its early days, and the front lines are moving ever closer to the Alamo. Today we reveal the battle that took place at one of our sister missions in San Antonio, what it divulged about the strengths and weaknesses of both sides, and the rift left in its wake among top Texas leaders. I'm your host, Emily Balcom. Today we're joined by Dr. Bruce Winders, the Alamo's former curator. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
The Battle of Concepción takes place on October 28, 1835. We are just a few weeks into the Texas Revolution at this point. What happens after the Battle of Gonzales that brings both sides to San Antonio?
After the Battle of Gonzales, the colonists start gathering at Gonzales very quickly. They're actually on their way while the battle's happening because Cos had occupied Behar, and the idea was the Centralists are on the move and we need to be on the move as well. And so Battle of Gonzales actually just happens and they're all coming anyway. But they elect Stephen F. Austin, the commander of what he calls the Federal Army of Texas, because he says we're Federalists. We're not colonists in rebellion against the Mexican government for, no reason, but we support the Federalist cause. And so about 300 colonists head off towards Behar, and they get here in mid-October. And they're about several miles outside of town where Austin establishes his camp, and then they begin to kind of feel out where General Cos's troops are, how much the town is fortified.
Why does control of San Antonio matter to either side?
This is one of those things that at the Alamo, we used to talk about the Alamo saying, the battle's not actually over the Alamo, but it's over the town. And people would say, what town? And it's San Antonio de Behar. What San Antonio de Behar represents is it's this historic center of governance, of commerce. It's a crossroads. As Travis will later say, it's the gateway to Texas. And what they mean by that is it really is where Mexican Texas stops and Anglo-Texas, where the colonies, begins. And Cos had wanted to gather Mexican troops at Behar or San Antonio and begin his campaign to sweep across the colonies and punish disloyal colonists and push those that weren't going to conform out of Texas. The colonists knew this. So their response was, we need to capture Behar and take it out of control of the Centralists. So both of them realized it was an important place because it was the launch pad whichever way you went. If you went out of Mexico into Texas or out of Texas into Mexico, that was the gateway.
The crossroads. As the Texans march towards San Antonio, they split into two. Where does each side go?
Austin's the commander, and what he does is he begins to organize his army into different divisions. And one of the divisions, he keeps one of them, but he sends one off to the missions, to San Jose, Espada. He's looking for supplies, and he sends Colonel James Bowie along in command of the division that goes to the missions. Also in command of those troops, Bannock, another name from the Texas Revolution. So they go to the missions. So what they're supposed to look for is corn and beans. They're supposed to see what the residents there think about the current situation, if they're going to be loyal to the Mexican government or support the revolution. They're supposed to look for the Mexican horse herd. And this is important because Goliad is the other gateway into the colonies. They're supposed to guard the Goliad Road and choose one of those missions as a supply base. So that's what they're supposed to do.
They choose Mission Concepción, and it's today very much in the middle of a neighborhood on the city's south side. What would the area have looked like back then?
Well, Concepción becomes important because Austin had ordered Bowie to move to Concepción. and to see what was happening there. It's on the outskirts of towns, on the southern outskirts of towns. He wanted to know if any of the buildings had been destroyed, what the fortifications were like. And so around there you had some former residents of the mission who lived there. But what's important is it's by the river. It's by the San Antonio River. And it's not just by the river, but it's by kind of an oxbow or a bend. And that's going to become very important in the battle. So it's on the suburbs of San Antonio. You can kind of see San Antonio from there, but you're not actually in San Antonio.
And how are they getting this information that they're gathering on this fact-finding mission to and from Austin?
Austin has instructed them to send couriers. And this is one of the things that Austin will later kind of reinforce. I sent you with orders to go to Concepcion, find a place to camp, but to contact me. And so the idea is they're sending back couriers by horses. Austin's sending orders, and Bowie and Fannin are supposed to send back information that they've gathered.
The Mexican army figures out the Texas army is divided, and October 28th decides to make its move. The Texans find themselves outnumbered.
This is one of the things that is kind of consistent in the Texas Revolution with the Texans being outnumbered. They've got about 90 men, but they have the advantage of that river that I talked about. They're able to go to the river, and the riverbank is about 6 feet high. And so it provides a natural fortification or embankment for them.
It's a good defensible spot.
It's a good defensible spot, and it's tree-lined. And that's one of the things that American riflemen, love to be in the trees where they can shoot at enemies. And so it's the ideal situation for the Texan defenders. It's not the ideal situation for Cosa's troops because they're going to have to attack across open fields. This is what the Texans want, and this is what Santa Anna and others will later say, don't attack them if they're in the woods, because they know what the outcome would be.
How close did the fighting take place in relation to Mission Concepcion, the actual church parish that we know today?
There's some debate about where the actual battle took place. Because rivers meander and because of the urbanization, the river of today is not the river of 1830. But it's several hundred yards away. So it's within sight of the mission. And in fact, the Texans supposedly had sentries up in the bell tower of the mission. That's one reason they knew the Mexicans were coming.
That's a really interesting image right there. The Mexican soldiers retreat after just 30 minutes, and they have significantly more casualties than the Texans.
There's some debate about how long the battle is. Bowie says it lasts for 3 hours, and so that's considerably more than 30 minutes. The 30 minutes is actually probably when the Mexican troops are coming across the open ground towards the river, and then at the very end of that, where Bowie orders a charge of the Texans across the open ground. It's easy for us to say 30 minutes, but if you're being shot at for 30 minutes, that's a long time.
That's a long time.
The Mexicans had a great number of casualties, much greater number of casualties. The Texans supposedly have 1 killed and 1 wounded. The Mexican casualties are officially about 14 killed and about 39 wounded. But Samuel Maverick, who very famous Texan, is actually prisoner inside Bejar at the time of the Battle of Concepcion. What Samuel Maverick writes in his diary is that on October 28th, 15 Mexican infantry out of 42 wounded are brought in this morning. And he says of the officers, there are 11 officers, only 1 is not wounded. So his idea is this is great bloodshed for the Mexican army. Now, the priest in San Antonio is allowed to go out later that afternoon, that evening, and collect the Mexican dead from the battlefield. What Bowie reports is they capture about 30 muskets that have been left behind, and they capture one of the Mexican cannon. There are 2 that are taken out. But again, what Samuel Maverick says is that almost all the Mexican artillerymen are either killed or wounded. It's because they're in the open, and the Texans, Bowie says, be deliberate in your shooting. Stay under cover and make sure that you're shooting and it'll count.
Very decisive Texas victory at the Battle of Concepcion, but the Mexican army learns a lot from this loss. You mentioned they learned don't get into a battle when the other side has tree cover. They also learn a lot about their weapons. What was that?
There are several things that become evident after this battle. One is that the Texans in a defensive position have an advantage. Usually defenders have an advantage, but the Texans tended to have rifles which had a greater range. Not every Texan was a marksman, but these people hunted for, not necessarily for a living, but for their livelihood, so they knew how to use firearms. The Mexicans were using the standard third model Brown Bess smoothbore musket. One of the things that the Texans captured was several cases of musket cartridges. And what they said was the Mexican powder was pretty much worthless. So what they ended up doing was taking the paper cartridges, tearing them apart, dumping the powder, and saving the lead balls. So Battle of Concepcion reinforced the idea that you don't attack Texans when they're in wooded areas. Now, oddly, there are people that say that James Walker Fannin, who gets lauded for his role in this battle, didn't learn a lesson. The lesson he learned was, we're invincible. Texans are invincible. And at Coletta Creek the next year, he is caught out on an open prairie. It leads to his defeat and surrender. So not everybody learned a lesson from Concepcion.
And in the aftermath of the battle, there is a big fallout among Texas leadership. Tell us about that and the consequences.
One of the fallouts of the battle happens with the organization in the Texan Army. Bowie, he's a local boy. He lives in San Antonio. He's very popular, has kind of an ego, as many of them do. One of the things that Austin had said is, I'm sending you to Concepcion, but I want you to find a campground. Tell me where it is. I will meet you there. He doesn't want him out there by himself. The idea is you find a spot, we'll put the army back together. He didn't do that. Bowie didn't do that. They stayed out there. And so that made Austin pretty livid because his idea was if the army had been together, we could have had a bigger victory. Or we could have actually marched into San Antonio. And so he issues an order that says officers who disobey orders will be arrested and subject to a court-martial. And we don't get a lot about this in diaries and subsequent histories, but soon after that, Bowie leaves the Army. Fannin leaves the Army. Travis leaves the Army. It seems to cause a rift that these men feel like, you've questioned our honor. We're not going to stand for that because, again, this is the 1830s and honor was very important.
And Bowie sits out the siege and battle of Bear because of this when it's literally in his backyard.
It's odd that Bowie doesn't participate since this is his home. He knows the place. He knows the people. What's interesting is that Samuel Maverick is released by the Mexicans shortly before the Battle of Behar with the promise of, I'm going back to the United States. I'm out of here. He doesn't do that. He goes to the Texans and says, I'll lead you into town. Anybody who's interested in this period, I would say you should probably read Samuel Augustus Maverick's diary from this time point. It's online at the Sons of DeWitt Colony website, which I would highly recommend, full of information.
And we'll make sure we link that in the podcast notes for people. What's the line you can draw between the Battle of Concepcion and then the Battle of the Alamo? How did we get from point A to point B?
The Battle of Concepcion and the Battle of the Alamo, it's a continuum. As we had said, the Texans kind of learned a false lesson, which was we're invincible. And that comes to play later at the Alamo and the Battle of Behar when you have William R. Carey, Captain Carey, saying, my men call themselves the Invincibles. So it's interesting. Americans at that time often refer to Andrew Jackson and the Battle of New Orleans. And, we defeated the British behind our cotton bales. And so the idea is you give us a defensive position and we will defend it. So if that's the lesson they learned, it didn't prove to be true.
It didn't translate to the Alamo.
No.
If people would like to visit this battle site today, Mission Concepcion is run by the National Park Service, and it's just a short drive from the Alamo.
The mission is worth seeing. It looks different from the Alamo, because the Alamo, as everybody knows or may not know, the church never was finished. But the church at Concepcion was finished, so you can go there and see what an actual Spanish church completed looked like. The compound doesn't exist, but it'll give you an idea of the approximation between where the Alamo is and where the Mission Concepcion is.
It's still an active parish. You can go to Catholic Mass there today. And it also has some really well-preserved original frescoes still visible in many parts of the church.
The frescoes at the Concepcion are very vivid and worth seeing. There's also a Catholic pilgrimage center there because it's part of the UNESCO family of sites.
The Alamo, as well as its 4 sister missions on the city's south side, make up the only UNESCO World Heritage Site in Texas. Now, a footnote I'd like to add here. Today, the Alamo is just a few miles away from a very important military installation, Fort Sam Houston. It's the command headquarters for Army North, Army South, and the Army Medical Command. So as you can imagine, we provide a lot of tours for military delegations who are in town. Dr. Winters, I know you've done a lot of those tours over the years. And many of these delegations are from South American countries. Those groups always ask about the Battle of La Concepción. So a very similar name to the battle we are talking about today. But for them, it's their Alamo. How so?
One of the things that always, I won't say astonished me, but I always found interesting was we would have civilians and military officers who would talk about the Battle of the Alamo, and they would say, we have a battle like that in our history. And I heard that so many times. And they would tell me, and it was like, well, yes, it is. The history of Latin America is very rich. It's full of wars. And in the 1880s, there's a war between Chile and Peru over who's going to control the nitrate or the guano, because guano was very important in industry and very lucrative. So there's a war over this area. And there's a battle in which a small Chilean garrison is in a town of La Concepción. There's 77 of them, and they're surrounded by about 1,000 Peruvians. And the Peruvians attack, they're driven off. It takes place around a church. So again, very similar. One of the things that happens is they try to send out couriers. We need reinforcements. They don't make it through. So unlike the Alamo, they don't make it through. But the Peruvians at one point say, hey, there's no reason for this bloodshed. Let's, you surrender and we'll treat you well. And the Chilean officer said, Chileans don't surrender. And so they fought on until all of them were killed. This is what makes it one of those last stands that is so universal. And again, and you can look at different history. Is it Thermopylae? Is it Masada? Is it the Alamo? Is it La Concepción? It's all those battles that have that same determination. We know we're going to lose, but we're going to fight because surrender is unthinkable and it's dishonorable. Honor before death.
As you like to say, all history is connected.
All history is connected.
Dr. Bruce Winters, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Be sure to check out the podcast notes. We've linked to more information on Mission Concepción in case you'd like to plan a visit. We've also linked to a short video about the mission that the Alamo's education team uses to teach school children about the San Antonio mission system, so you can see the area around where the battle took place. You've been listening to Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo Podcast.